This video series, Are You Well Connected? Conversations Can Impact Your Wealth, is designed to introduce you to some principles and teach you some of the science of how relationships affect our actual outcomes in life. Though because it's difficult to define this amorphous relationships that we have, we're going to take a more practical look at this through the lens of conversations. To help me with that, I brought into our conversation today Dr. Koosh Cooper. Dr. Koosh Cooper teaches being a leader, an ontological and phenomenological approach, and public policy for children and youth at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. That's also where she received her MSW and PhD in social work. As a social entrepreneur and a specialist in the study of implementation of what's next for human services, Dr. Cooper uses long-standing relationships with policymakers, leading practitioners, and consumers to shield and guide California's organizations, both public and private, through reform initiatives. I asked Dr. Cooper to join us because today we're going to have a conversation about conversations and how they affect relationships. And given the courses she teaches at UCLA and the work that she's done with agencies across the state of California, her background in social work, she is an expert at knowing how conversations influence individuals and groups. So Dr. Cooper, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul, for that wonderful introduction. I'm glad to be here with you.
To start us off, can you share with me what your response is when people ask you if you do culture change for organizations?
Absolutely. So often, as a consultant in the area of social work and human services organizations will ask me if I do culture change work, if they might hire me to do culture change work, and I say I do, but with a caveat. The culture change work I do has nothing to do with retreats and buttons and slogans and branding. The culture change I do is related to measuring performance. I tell organizations who ask me to shift their culture that I will develop a performance management system for them that is going to change what they and their people measure. And what that does is when you change what people measure, it automatically changes what they talk about. And what you talk about, not the music you listen to, not the food you eat, is what I say creates your culture.
So redoing the carpeting or piping in new music is not going to handle an organization's culture change. Though we have a cultural change our clients are up against. We think, talk, and teach differently about money here at Sound Financial Group. Different than other financial firms and the media talk about money, different than what people have been taught or the way they have been raised to think about money. For those of you who've been through our design build process and now are watching this video, you have already noticed how different your language is around money now. Because we change the conversations we have about money by learning new distinctions, that is, new words, and putting that practice in our lives. This inevitably changes our actual conversations or relationships, not just with people, but with outcomes. Outcomes in our life in the areas we care about, like money, faith, marriage, or health. Now in this video, Dr. Cooper and I are going to guide you through a TED Talk recorded in 2010, The Hidden Influence of Social Networks. This talk, given by Dr. Nicholas Christakis, is talking about how relationships affect things like obesity, depression, or happiness. Today, Dr. Cooper and I will do two things. First, we're going to give you a lens to view this video through that will make it practical by taking you away from all the amorphous idea of relationships and instead anchoring it in conversation. Second, we're going to talk about how this new way of seeing the conversations in our lives to create the real results in areas of your life that you care about. Now, before we launch this video, let me give you a little background about Dr. Christakis. He's a sociologist and physician known specifically for his research on social networks and biosocial determinants of human behavior and longevity. At this time of this recording, he's at Harvard when he recorded the TED Talk, but now he's at Yale. Remember, this video is made before the ubiquity of social media. He even mentions MySpace, and I'm not even sure that's a website anymore. This is about the actual conversations and relationships that we have, not social media. So that this is not just interesting to you, we're going to have you watch a clip of the talk. Then Dr. Cooper and I are going to come back and give you the practical thinking that you will need so that you can do something with this in your actual life.
For me, this story begins about 15 years ago when I was a hospice doctor at the University of Chicago. And I was taking care of people who were dying and their families in the south side of Chicago. And I was observing what happened to people and their families over the course of their terminal illness. And in my lab, I was studying the widower effect, which is a very old idea in the social sciences, going back 150 years, known as dying of a broken heart. So when I die, my wife's risk of death can double, for instance, in the first year. And I had gone to take care of one particular patient, a woman who was dying of dementia. And in this case, unlike this couple, she was being cared for by her daughter. And the daughter was exhausted from caring for her mother. And the daughter's husband, he also was sick from his wife's exhaustion. And I was driving home one day, and I get a phone call from the husband's friend, calling me because he was depressed about what was happening to his friend. So here I get this call from this random guy that's having an experience that's being influenced by people at some social distance. And so I suddenly realized two very simple things. First, the widowhood effect was not restricted to husbands and wives. And second, it was not restricted to pairs of people. And I started to see the world in a whole new way, like pairs of people connected to each other. And then I realized that these individuals would be connected into foursomes with other pairs of people nearby. And that in fact, these people were embedded in other sorts of relationships, marriage and spousal and friendship and other sorts of ties. And that in fact, these connections were vast. And that we were all embedded in this broad set of connections with each other. So I started to see the world in a completely new way, and I became obsessed with this. I became obsessed with how it might be that we're embedded in these social networks and how they affect our lives. So social networks are these intricate things of beauty. And they are so elaborate and so complex and so ubiquitous, in fact, that one has to ask what purpose they serve. Why are we embedded in social networks? I mean, how do they form? How do they operate? And how do they affect us? And so my first topic with respect to this was not death, but obesity. And it had become trendy to speak about the obesity epidemic. And along with my collaborator, James Fowler, we began to wonder whether obesity really was epidemic, and could it spread from person to person like the 4 people I discussed earlier. So this is a slide of some of our initial results. It's 2,200 people in the year 2000. Every dot is a person. We make the dot size proportional to people's body size. So bigger dots are bigger people. And in addition, if your body size, if your BMI, your body mass index is above 30, if you're clinically obese, we also color the dots yellow. So if you look at this image right away, you might be able to see that there are clusters of obese and non-obese people in the image. But the visual complexity is still very high. It's not obvious exactly what's going on. In addition, some questions are immediately raised. How much clustering is there? Is there more clustering than would be due to chance alone? How big are the clusters? How far do they reach? And most importantly, what causes the clusters? So we did some mathematics to study the size of these clusters. This here shows on the y-axis the increase in the probability that a person is obese given that a social contact of theirs is obese. And on the x-axis, the degrees of separation between the two people. And on the far left, you see the purple line. It says that if your friends are obese, your risk of obesity is 45% higher. And the next bar over, the orange line, says if your friends' friends are obese, your risk of obesity is 25% higher. And then the next line over says if your friend's friend's friend, someone you probably don't even know is obese, your risk of obesity is 10% higher. And it's only when you get to your friends' that there's no longer a relationship between that person's body size and your own body size. Well, what might be causing this clustering? There are at least three possibilities. One possibility is that as I gain weight, it causes you to gain weight, a kind of induction, a kind of spread from person to person. Another possibility, very obvious, is homophily, or birds of a feather flock together. Here, I form my tie to you because you and I share a similar body size. And the last possibility is what is known as confounding, because it confounds our ability to figure out what's going on. And here the idea is not that my weight gain is causing your weight gain, nor that I preferentially form a tie with you because you and I share the same body size, but rather that we share a common exposure to something like a health club that makes us both lose weight at the same time. And when we studied these data, we found evidence for all of these things, including for induction. And we found that if your friend becomes obese, it increases your risk of obesity by about 57% in the same given time period.
Dr. Cooper, he just finished talking about the dot size and body size. Though I think what we want our audience to think about is the connections, those little lines between each of the dots. Those are the conversations between these people. Do I have that right?
No. So an example that comes to mind right away is this. A lot of the organizations that I work with will contract with their local departments of children and family services to do their work in the foster care area. And they will, when they come to me, their relationships with their funder, their supplier, the Department of Children and Family Services, is usually very strained. I can almost count on the fact that their relationships with their funder and their supplier are strained. And when we go to look as to why, turns out it's the primary conversations that the workforce is having about the Department of Children and Family Services. And it's not the ones that you have in meetings. It's not the ones that you have on your podcasts. It's the conversations you have in the break room. It's the conversations you have at the water cooler. And if I start to hear conversations like, well, if they only understood, or if they were only more efficient, the complaint, I could actually count the complaints and the relationship that the larger organization will have with the Department of Children and Family Services will be a function of the amount of complaining that the organization does about the Department of Children and Family Services. And there are good departments of Children and Family Services all over California. There are bad departments of Children and Family Services. It doesn't matter. The relationship is usually a function of the level of complaining.
I think the generative conversations between people, that those connections are generative, where we are building something. Say my wife and I in a commitment to being in better health. We talk about our health, the strategies that we're in, and that creates a relationship to each other and to our health. Those connections are what he's talking about. It's not because I have a pheromone and you're catching it. It is from me in conversation with others. Because of thoughts, conversations, and behaviors are becoming contagious. Dr. Cooper and I have been talking about what's the equivalent of not being healthy when it comes to finance and financial decisions. An example, it could be somebody who goes out and gets the newest, baddest car. And the only conversation that others may be having with that person are, did you lease or did you buy it? What was the interest rate? What no one ever asks is, was it financially responsible for you to get this car? What's never talked about in money in terms of whether or not anything was consequential to our future about that decision. Dr. Cooper, can you share with our audience the social determinants of our behavior in health and money and how they tie together?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that's becoming more and more obvious to me is that we somehow don't view financial health the same way as we view physical health. but we should, right? And so all the social determinants of physical health apply to the social determinants of financial health. And so and this happens in my circles a lot. We talk about vacations. Hey, how about, we've had a rough year. We deserve it.
We deserve it. Yes.
We haven't hung out on a vacation in a while together with the kids. Let's all go to Hawaii. I just got a Groupon for this great resort. Let's go.
Yes.
So now one is faced with a decision. Am I going to be the one of the multitude of families that got invited? Am I going to be the one that says, you know what? We've had our vacation for the year. Going to this vacation wouldn't be in line with our financial strategy. Or am I going to be the one that says, I can't afford it? Am I going to miss out? Everybody's going to go hang out in Hawaii. Their bonds are going to get stronger. Will they invite me again ever if I don't go? So you're faced with all this. And so you go ahead and you take the vacation. And you know what? You just, hey, I just won't save this 1 month. The belonging is more important.
Now I want to come back to belonging in a few minutes in our next segment. Though you mentioned the concept of afford, we look at our predominant conversations. And for those of you who have listened to our podcast, like episode number 26, 27, or right here on this channel, the video on how cash flow trumps rate of return. One of the easiest ways that we can be convinced to make purchasing decisions is the word afford. You're successful. Didn't you just get that big new client? Or you just had a promotion. You can afford it. Anytime we answer a question or have a conversation that orbits around this idea of afford, we're stepping onto somebody else's field of play. We want our clients and the viewers of this video to have the opportunity to use something else other than the word afford. So when someone comes to you and says, you can afford it, you can answer simply, of course I can afford it. But if we did that, it would break strategy. Dr. Cooper, what's the first question that you would have to ask me if I tell you that would break strategy for me and my family?
Well, what is your strategy?
Perfect. And now what I've done is I've invited them onto my field of play. I get to set the rules. I get to draw the chalk outlines on this field. I don't have to play by the same field as Groupon or the vendor or the bank or the car company. So I think about how bad financial decisions can roam around a network. For instance, people don't talk about their savings rate like some people don't talk about their waist size inside the network. And yet everyone can see the difference between people's waist size.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I actually don't think it's quite going to the gym that has you lose weight and exercising. I think when you start to spend 5, 6, 7 hours a week with a trainer or surrounded by people who are working out and watching what they eat, you're changing what you talk about.
Yes.
Your social circle has just changed for almost 10 hours a week. And I think that is as much a function of health as actually the exercising itself.
I'm so glad you could be here for part 1 of this video series. I would encourage you to share this video with people so that you can have a conversation with them about it. Subscribe to our channel and send us an email or go to the show notes and download the relationship model to begin to assess the network of conversations that you're living in.